Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fantastic Frameworks for Fast, Fun, Frictionless, Feature-Filled Flows. My name is Evan Ponter. I'm an independent consultant from Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States. I want to give a quick thank you to all the sponsors who helped make this event happen. There's a raffle going on, so I just posted a link in the chat. If you click on that link and put your name in, you'll be entered for the raffle. We'll choose a winner at the very end of this session. Definitely check that out. Today's session is all about flows. Flows. Everybody's talking about flows because Salesforce is spending a lot of time and money investing in flow as the single declarative automation solution for the Salesforce platform. And what this means is they eventually hope to retire workflow rules and process builder. I believe in the winter 22 release, they even have a message saying, if you try to create a new workflow rule, they will not let you. They make you go to Flow to set that up. They have a workflow rule migration tool that helps you convert those, conversion tool. And there's been a lot of discussion around what's the best way to set up flows and how do we use flows to solve different use cases. And I spent a lot of time working with different clients who wanted to go through that migration and set up all of their automations in Flow. And I've come up with a bunch of tips and tricks and a couple frameworks that I find I tend to use over and over again as I'm setting up record-triggered flows. So all the flows we're talking about today are flows that happen when you save a brand new record or edit an existing record. We're not going to be talking about any screens or schedules or subflows or platform events. So just record triggered flows for today's session. And to help walk us through a couple different examples and see how we would solve that in Flow and highlight a piece of the framework that I'm hoping to show, we're going to be stepping through a series of business requirements that a fictitious org has and how we might want to solve for that. First situation we have is a same record update. And the scenario here is a naming convention. This sales organization wants to help streamline their opportunity names, and they don't want their reps to have to manually enter the information. They're super inconsistent when they do it. So they wanted some automation that will automatically name an opportunity with the account name, the close date, and the amount of that opportunity. And anytime any one of those pieces of information changes, they wanted the name to be updated to reflect that change. We can solve for this in Flow. And what I want to highlight here is this is any sort of situation where a record is created or updated, and you want to update another field on that same record. We're going to be using what's known as a before save flow to do this. So I'm going to jump back into the org here. Here's my opportunity before save flow. And what I mean by that is there are two flavors of record triggered flows. There's automation that happens after you click the save button. Before anything else happens, your flow is evaluated. The other type of flow is actions and related records, which means you click the save button, your record's committed to the database, and then your flow runs. And there are some subtle differences that happen depending on the timing of when your flow is evaluated. This before save flow is called a fast field update. It's the way you optimize your flow when you're setting it up here in the flow builder. And it tells you this high performance flow runs before the record is saved to the database. And you can take advantage of this performance boost if you're doing something like updating a field on the triggering record. We want to use this type of flow anytime we have a same record update, and literally any other type of automation that's updating a different record, creating records, deleting records, sending email alerts, doing advanced Apex things. We're going to be using actions and related records for all of that other stuff. But just burn it into your brain. If you're doing a same record update, you want to use fast field updates. Absolutely. All right, so to solve for our situation, we're going to be setting this up on the opportunity. We want this automation to run anytime a record's created or updated, so we can apply our naming convention. And the first thing we need to do here is set entry conditions. This is a way to narrow down when your flow actually runs. This is something only available for flows. There's no other declarative automation that offers something like this. And this is the first way you can make sure your flows are being efficient and only running when they need to. There's a ton of things that happen behind the scenes when the Salesforce Flow Engine is initializing and getting things set up in order to run your automation. So the fewer times we have that happen, the faster your org is going to feel. So as people are clicking the save button, they're not seeing a bunch of spin errors, loading, waiting time. Things happen fast as they need to, and you sort of can move on with your Salesforce work. So these entry conditions are super critical for narrowing down when the flow runs. And here's the way I've set it up for this situation. I'm using the OR condition requirements here. And since we want this flow to run when a record is first created and we want to use entry conditions, we sort of need to have a condition that says run this flow when the record is brand new. And the way we can check for a brand new record in a fast field update flow that's running before save is we can check the ID field to see if it has a value. Because a brand new record, when you click the save button, the flow is evaluated, it hasn't been committed to the database yet, meaning the ID has not been assigned. So if we check that ID field and it's null, we know this is a brand new record. So that's why we have that as part of our entry conditions here. The other three conditions I have are looking for changes to the key pieces of information we're going to reference in our naming convention. So if that account ID is changed, or the amount is changed, or the close date is changed, we also want this flow to run. Now, the only other element we need on our canvas is this quote-unquote update records element. But I want to highlight that the fewer elements you have on your flow canvas for a record-triggered flow, the faster your flow is going to run. A lot of these database elements will get bulkified at runtime. So I know it's pretty simple to think, oh, if I'm just creating one opportunity, everything's going to be fine, even if I have a couple of elements. Yes, you're probably right. But think about bulk operations. If you're trying to upload a spreadsheet of opportunity records and you're creating thousands of opportunities, or you're trying to update thousands of opportunities to a new close date or to a new amount or whatever it is, you want to make sure that your record triggered flows are set up to be super efficient to handle those bulk operations. And for these elements that need to be bulkified at runtime, you want to minimize the amount of times that happens. And by having fewer of those on the canvas, we can make sure that we're optimizing for those scenarios. So within this quote-unquote update records element, I say that in quotes because we are in before save context here, and Salesforce does not actually introduce any additional DML operations. Those are database manipulation language. What they've done here is you used to have to do this with an assignment element, and you can absolutely still do that. I think they wanted to make it clear for people who are not as familiar with before and after save context that the assignments you're making in this element are being committed to the database. So they brought us this update records element and they locked it down. So the only thing we can do is assign values to the record that triggered the flow. And what happens behind the scenes is they actually just translate this update records element to an assignment. So if you want to use an assignment element here, it's the exact same effect in the end. So all I'm doing in this is setting a value in the name field for a naming convention, and I'm going to use a formula in order to set that value instead of trying to paste everything into here because this is a super tiny window. And over here in the formula for name value, there's a couple things I want to highlight, which may seem simple at first, but will save you a lot of headache. The first thing is you can access any information from your triggering record or any record above it in the data architecture hierarchy by using the $record global variable. Salesforce Flow Engine gives you that for free. There are no additional queries that need to be run. If I click into that $record, here are all the fields on the opportunity in this case. It's whatever your triggering object is. You also have access to those relationship fields if you want to traverse and grab information from like the account. So if I click on account, I can pull in any account field. And you can actually traverse up to 10 levels of relationships from the $record global variable, and you will not be introducing any queries to your logic, which is really, really cool. So definitely take advantage of that. Anytime you can access information without running a separate query for it, that's going to be much more efficient. It saves you that query, which applies to one of your governor limits, and your flow is going to be super fast. Now, the thing I will caution you on is you want to make sure your relationship fields have a value before you attempt to traverse them. So the way we do that is right here in our formula. We can make decisions without having to add decision elements to the canvas. So all I'm doing here is using an if statement to check to make sure that account ID field on the $record global variable has a value. If so, go ahead and traverse it and grab the name from that account. If there is no account specified, I can put any other static text that I want to. So here I've put unknown account. Keep this principle in mind as you're working with relationships from really any records that you're working with in the Flow engine. You want to make sure those relationships have values before you attempt to traverse them. To keep going here, the rest of our naming convention, we have some static text to delimitate the different pieces of information. We want to pull in the close date, which is a date data type, but our formula is going to return text, so I need to convert that date to text. And all I want to emphasize here is you have access to all of the formulas and functions from the formula builder for like building a custom field. All of those functions are available to you here in the Flow formula builder. They don't have a nice picker for those functions yet. They've started to release some features that show that. I know the entry conditions got that in summer 22. I believe the winter 22 is going to bring that nice formula builder to the formula resource type when you're building them in Flow. So that'll make that a lot nicer. Right now, what I do is I keep the documentation open for Salesforce functions and formulas so that I make sure I'm pulling in the right parameters and getting them in the right order. The last piece of this is bringing in the amount from the record. And that just shows you how much flexibility you have to format values as you're working with them in the formula resource here. Currency values are stored as plain numbers in the database. There are no currency symbols, there are no decimal points unless it has one. And if it's like 50 cents, it might just say the number 0.5. It's not always going to have two decimal places. So if you want to format it to look like currency that you're used to, you're going to have to do that yourself by manipulating that raw number. This is an example that will format currency for US dollars. You can search in the Trailblazer community to find any formatting for any currency you might want to use and get your numbers formatted accordingly. So this is just adding in the US dollar sign, commas, and then the decimal point, making sure it's to two decimal places. And that's really it for our Flow canvas. I want to start with a simple example here. So let's activate this and I'll show you how it works. So I'll jump back over to an org and I'm going to create a brand new opportunity under this Burlington Textiles account. And the amount is going to be $500. I'm going to close this at the end of August, and I'll set a stage. And if you watch my name field here, as soon as I click save, my flow runs, and then the record's committed to the database. It happens so fast that even the toast message, the standard toast message, already has the naming convention applied. So let's jump into that opportunity. Here's the name based on the logic in the flow, and if I update anything like the amount, let's say this is now, I missed a zero, this should be $5,000, and I want to update the close date to the end of September. As soon as I make those changes and click save, the data is updated in the name field right there. Now, there are two ways you can treat a standard field as if it were a formula. So what I have here is I'm setting a value in a standard field like opportunity name, and I can allow for people to make changes to this name if they want to. My custom name. So if they want to save an appendage to the end of the name, with the way I have it set up currently, they can do that. If you wanted to actually have a standard field behave completely like a formula and not allow changes, what you could do is in your flow, in your entry conditions, in addition to watching for changes for all of these fields, you can also watch for changes to the name field. And in those situations, you also want to run your flow. So if the name field changes here, also run the flow. And what that'll do is if somebody attempts to change the opportunity name, it's going to override it with your naming convention if you want to keep that very strict. So two different flavors of setting up a naming convention if you're interested. And that concept can be applied to any other field that you might want to behave like a formula and maybe allow for an override. So pretty flexible ways to handle different requirements. So that's our simple example. Here's our entire flow canvas, just one element, and it's applying that naming convention. Let's take a look at another business requirement and how we might factor that into the same flow so that we can accomplish both things while keeping things super fast and efficient. For this situation, we are also doing a same record update. So we're going to be using our same opportunity before save flow. The sales team wants to help out their operations team here, and sales managers realize that their sales reps are creating multiple opportunities for the same account, which is totally fine. But when it comes to shipment time at the end of the month, they want to consolidate all of those shipments onto one truck to get them out to the customer at the same time. So they're hoping that we can set up some automation that anytime a brand new opportunity is created, can we go check the account for any other open opportunities? And if we find one, we want to put some text in the next step field to see if those products can be delivered at the same time as the existing open opportunity, and then put a link to that record that we found. So there's a couple different things happening here in this example, but A, we need to query for some information. So I'm going to be accessing info we don't already have from our $record global variable. And then we're going to conditionally update that next step field. It's only if we find results. So I'll show you how we do that in the most efficient way possible. So I'm going to flip over to our opportunity before save flow, a new version here. First thing we need to check is this flow running at the right time? So in our start element, still running on the opportunity, still when it's created or updated to solve for both situations. And we're already running this flow when the ID is null, which tells us it's a brand new record. So we don't need to make any changes here. The other thing I want to emphasize is I'm setting up this second scenario in the same flow we were just using before. And we're going to solve for both requirements here. I'm of the belief that your before save flows, you should really only need one per object. I've had a hard time justifying setting up two and that are separate. The main reason for that belief is if both of those pieces of automation need to execute for the same record, you want to consolidate those bulkification processes. So by having a single flow that has a single update records element, aka an assignment, we can minimize the amount of bulkification that happens in the flow at runtime. So that's why I've decided to set that up here. So let's see about the adjustments that I've had to make. I am adding a decision here. And I use decisions to help me decide which elements do I want to execute. And it's less about business logic and it's more about making sure I only execute elements that need to be executed. So here in this decision, we are deciding if we need to check for that open opportunity on the account. And I'm using a formula Boolean resource here. I'm a big fan of formulas in flows. They help you reuse logic in multiple places and maintain that logic in a single definition. So it's really great for maintenance and making sure you don't repeat yourself in other places. One of the programming principles I try to bring to flow is don't repeat yourself. So I've set up this formula resource that returns a true or false value that is checking if I need to query for that open opportunity. It's called need to check for open opportunity. And if that's true, I'm going to go down the right side or the left side of the decision here. So in that need to check for open opportunity formula, it returns a Boolean, so true or false. I can use the isNew function here, so you can use that within your formulas. So I'm checking to see, is this a brand new record and does it specify an account? The reason I do that is I don't want to run a query looking for an open opportunity on an account when I don't even have an account ID. That's going to give me no results or weird results. So definitely want to avoid that situation. So all I'm doing here is checking to make sure I have all the information I need in order to run the query. So you can apply that to any other situation where you're about to do a query for the database. Make sure you have all the information you think you should have. If both of those things are true, I route to this get open opportunity, get records. This is a query in order to pull some information from the system that I don't already have access to. What I'm looking for here is I want to find an opportunity record that's related to the same account. So I make sure the account ID equals the $record.account ID. Again, I'm pulling that information from the triggering record here. The other thing I want to make sure is true on that opportunity I find is that it is open. So I'm just checking the is closed field to make sure it is false. And that tells me it's an open opportunity. I'm going to sort those records by close date because I only need the first one. They wanted a link to the very next open opportunity under that same account. So I can sort those records by close date, only store the first one. And then down here is something that I've started doing that has really made things much easier. I used to automatically store all fields. That would create a record variable. And what would happen is if there were no results found by the query, you would have to add a decision element to your canvas to check are there results in that record variable before you try to access one of its values, like the ID. And that just led to a couple extra steps and another check and another decision that I felt like we could eliminate. So the way I found to do that is if you only need a few key pieces of information from the results of your query, you can store them in plain variables instead of within a record variable. What that does is it eliminates the need to use a decision to check if there are results from your query to check that record variable. You can simply work with that text variable later on in your flow, and you're never going to run into an error for trying to access an attribute on a record variable that never got set. So this is one of the handy tips that I've started doing. So I'm saying store those, choose fields and assign variables, advanced option here, and then I'm storing it in separate variables, so I can just choose that ID field, put it in a text variable called open opportunity ID. Now, regardless if I decide to run that query or skip it, I'm routing to a single quote-unquote update records element that is assigning values to the triggering record at the end of my before save flow for an object. This keeps things consolidated. So as you do a bulk update or a bulk insert of records, and you might have multiple different things that need to happen automation-wise, you can keep everything consolidated. This is where the conditionality part starts to kick in. So you'll notice I still have my naming convention here. Nothing has changed with that configuration. That will still apply the name as the record's created or updated. I'm adding in automation for the next step field. And here I'm using, again, a formula to set its value. So it's called next step value. And in here is where this framework really starts to come to life. Let me zoom in a little bit. Doing something that is really simple, but is very powerful. I'm using an if statement. If statements have the unique behavior that they will only evaluate a condition if the conditions are true. And as you're working through multiple conditions, if something evaluates to false, it will stop right there. So it's a really safe way to check for things and execute one option versus another. Groundbreaking, right? Use an if statement. But what's really cool about this is I'm eliminating decisions from my flow canvas by incorporating all of the decision making into the flow formula. And I'm doing it for a specific field within an assignment element, or AKA a quote unquote update records, that is doing multiple things. So this gives me some flexibility to individually decide, do I want to update the next step field or do I want to leave it alone? First thing I'm doing in my if statement criteria is I'm referencing that same need to check for open opportunity Boolean formula resource from earlier. That makes sure that I routed down the left side of my decision and ran that query. And this is a way to keep all that logic nice and consolidated. And then I'm checking that open opportunity ID text field, which should have the results of the query. And if it has a value, then I can work with it. So if it has a value, then I'm going to put the static text that they wanted, see if the products can be delivered at the same time. And then I'm putting a hyperlink to that record, referencing that open opportunity ID. What I'm doing here in the hyperlink is I'm making it dynamic. In this org, I'm in a Trailhead playground. The domain name is Wise Otter, and then it has a bunch of letters and numbers. I don't want to have to remember that and hard code it into my flow logic. I want to be able to freely move this logic from sandbox to production. I might want to take this same pattern and apply it in a different org entirely. And I don't want to have to go mucking around with the URLs for things. So the way you can dynamically build a URL, in the Flow engine, there's this $API global variable. It gives you a URL for the current org that you are logged into. And the only reason there are so many of these is because every time they come out with a new API version, Winter 22 is going to be API version 56. Summer 22 is API version 55.0. So if we scroll down here, we'll find Enterprise Server URL 550. That's API version 55.0. That's giving you a URL. So we can work with that to dynamically generate a link to a record. I'm taking the left portion of that URL up to and including the .com/, and then I'm just tacking on the record ID. And that builds you a nice dynamic URL to any record in Salesforce. All you need is the record ID to do that. And I'm going to put that into my next step field. Now, the else statement for my if statement here, the else condition or parameter or whatever, I'm doing something that might look a little odd at first. So if I don't want to automate this next step field, I'm going to set it to the value that it already has. I want to let that sink in for a second. Why would I do that? If I set a next field to the value that it already has, it results in no change. So the reason you want to do that is because you could have a bunch of different fields you want to automate in your before save flow. And I wanted to make sure I could do all of those automations, adding more and more fields here, and make decisions individually using formulas to decide if I'm going to update each field or not. And the way you can do that is by using an if statement that checks to say, do I want to automate this field? If so, here's the automated value. If not, and I want to leave it alone, set that field to the value it already has. No change will be made in the database. These flows that run before save are before the record's committed to the database, so you won't see any field history tracking for these that are not changing. It's a really cool way to keep your flow consolidated, make decisions individually and conditionally. So that is the framework for before save flows. This is about as complicated as your before save flow canvas should be. You might have situations where you need to run a couple different queries. I would replicate this decision element and the get as a subsequent set of elements. And then at the end of all of your queries, you would route to a single update records, quote unquote, assignment element to assign values to the triggering record. This scales really nicely using these principles and frameworks so that you can continue to add other requirements and set additional fields on that triggering record. Let's activate this version and do a quick demo of how this all works together. I'm going to jump back over here to my Burlington account. I'm going to create another opportunity and notice that both of my automation logic for both requirements are being executed. So here I'm going to put $6,000 for the amount. This is going to close in the middle of September, and I'm going to set a stage. So let's watch the name field and let's watch the next step field. I'm going to click save. My opportunity gets named right away, so my naming convention logic is still intact. This next step field also got a value automated. So I have my static text and I have my hyperlink to the next open opportunity on the account where these products need to be consolidated. Now this will stay there even as somebody makes changes to the amount field. So I'm going to change this to 8,000. Watch what happens in the name. I click save. My naming convention still updates the record, but the next step field did not get overwritten or changed. And that's the power of making those decisions individually within the formulas for the assignment element or the update records element at the end of your before save flow. So all of your automation can run independently while being consolidated, and you can decide when you want to make updates to certain fields and have all of these things play nicely together. Let's take a look at a few other situations that are not same record updates. So this example is when you want to create multiple records using declarative automation solution like Flow. The sales managers want to mark certain accounts as high priority, and they want two things to happen there. They want the sales rep assigned to that account to review all of the history for that account, and they should do that today as soon as possible. And then they want them to set up a call with the client on the following day. So there's two task records that should be created when a sales manager changes customer priority to high. We can solve for that with Flow, but we're going to use a different flavor of Flow to do this. Since we're not doing a same record update, we actually need to use the after save flow or the actions and related records version. So here I've set up a totally separate flow. This is running on account, since that's where we want our automation to happen, is when a sales manager updates an account record. They're only doing it on update. It's not when they create the record. So down here in our entry conditions, we're going to check to make sure that the customer priority equals high. And we only want to run this flow when the record's updated to meet those conditions. So the customer priority field was changed from some other value, and it now equals high. We optimize this flow for actions and related records, and that really just gives us the ability to do all of those other actions like create records, update records, delete, send emails, all that wonderful stuff. So this is our start element. There's a couple things we're going to do on our canvas here, and the first thing I want to highlight is that we don't want to simply create two task records individually by using two separate create records elements. We want to minimize the amount of DML that's happening in our flow. Minimizing the pink elements. They've highlighted them for you in almost a red color, meaning you should use them sparingly. These are a little more processing intensive operations, mostly for DML. It's because when you create a record, you're going to kick off all the automation that happens on that object. So the more times you do that, the longer it's going to take to process. So we want to keep that consolidated as much as possible and do this in the most efficient way that we can. The way we can be a little more efficient and just make a single call to create records is by using collections. If you've never worked with collections, it's not a scary topic, I promise. It's something you are very familiar with. So when you are doing laundry and your dryer is finished or you're done hanging your clothes up outside, do you take one article of clothing, go all the way home to your dresser, upstairs to your bedroom, and fold that clothing, put it away, and then go back all the way to your basement or to the laundromat or outside and get the next article of clothing? No, that would be super inefficient. You would constantly be running up and down the stairs or back and forth from the laundromat. That part of the journey is the expensive part, getting from wherever you're drying your clothes to home. So we want to minimize the amount of times we do that. In the flow world, that's minimizing the amount of create statements here, the expensive part. The way we help ourselves do laundry is by using a laundry basket. So we take each article of clothing out of the dryer or off the clothesline, and we fold it and we put it in a basket. In the flow world, that's adding it to a collection. Collection is your laundry basket of the flow world. So once we add all of our records to a collection, aka all of our clothes to the laundry basket, then we go home one time or we go upstairs to our bedroom. Let's dive into these assignment elements to show you how that works in the flow world here. This first assignment element is assigning values to record variables. I've set up two single record variables here, task 1 and task 2. They look like this. Data type is record. You choose an object and you're not allowing multiple values. That sets you up with a single task record, one article of clothing. In order to fold it or manipulate it, we use an assignment element to assign values to it. So I can set the due date, the assigned to, the priority, subject, who, what record it's related to, all of that stuff using either global variables or fields from the $record global variable. I can use static values. You can use formulas here. There are a lot of different options for assigning values to the fields of your record variable. The other thing I'm doing is I'm consolidating a little bit. I can also assign all the values I need to task number 2 within the same assignment element. I don't need a separate one to do this. These can happen in any order and nothing will go astray here. What I do want to emphasize is once you have all the values assigned to your individual record variables, you want to add them to a collection in a subsequent assignment. Because within one of these assignment elements, Salesforce could execute them in an arbitrary order. It's not guaranteed that you would assign all of the values to your record variables before it got added to your collection if you tried to do all of that in a single assignment element. So I keep the adding each record to the collection as a separate assignment just to make sure nothing happens out of order. All we're doing here for this second assignment is adding task 1 and task 2 to our laundry basket. which is adding them to the record collection. This record collection is set up almost exactly the same as the single records. It's a record data type where you choose an object, and then all you do to make it a collection is check off the allow multiple values checkbox. Once you have that set up, you can add your individual records to that collection. So I'm adding them to this task to create collection. And then at the end here, for creating the tasks, I can specify that record collection as the target for which records I want to create. Everything that happens in yellow here is happening in flow memory. So it's like flow is writing it down on a napkin real quick just to say, okay, I got it. I want to assign all these values to these tasks. All right, what do you want me to do with this? And then the pink one is creating the records. That's committing it to the database, making it real, saving it, essentially. Let's activate this version and show you how this works out. So as the sales manager, I'm going to come in here to the Burlington account, and I've decided this is a high customer priority. So I'm going to upgrade this from low to high, and watch the tasks over here. This is now high. I click save. Just like that, I have 2 tasks created super fast, super efficient. They have all the correct values so that the sales rep will review this account today and then set up a call for that client tomorrow. Now let's look at our final example here, updating multiple records. So the sales team got tired of accounts would go inactive and they would have to go manually update all of those open opportunities to close lost. What a nightmare, right? So they asked for some automation. If they wanted to set the active field to no and have that automatically change the stage of all the open opportunities to close lost. So we can do that within our same account after save flow. And this is where some more of the debate starts to creep up about where you organize your flow logic. I'm of the mindset that if you can keep things simple, definitely keep things simple. When things get more complicated or you have a really good reason to separate out your logic into separate flows that run in the same context, that means the same object and the same trigger order, there's absolutely reasons to do that. I found for debugging purposes, and there are some situations where you might be watching for a single change and executing multiple actions. It's nice to have all of that in a single flow here. So I'm going to show you how I've set this up, assuming that things are going to scale and still trying to keep things as efficient as possible. This is the same account after save flow from before with a couple of additions. So here in the start element, I'm going to show you a glimpse into the future of how this start entry conditions might grow and a way that you can scale them so that you don't pull your hair out trying to make sure your flow is running at the right time. Sometimes it's easier to watch for changes on key fields. For things like an opportunity stage, you might be doing automation at every stage. When it changes to open, when it changes to negotiation, when it changes to closed won. So instead of trying to hard code all of those individual scenarios, just watch for that field to change. You know your flow is going to have to do something at that point. So sometimes you accept the cost that you're going to launch that flow and you're going to make subsequent decisions later. So that's sort of what I've mapped out here. I'm watching for changes on customer priority, and I want to launch the flow in those situations. And then to add in my new scenario, if the active field is changed, I put an or condition and say, okay, also launch this flow if active is changed. This flow is still set up for actions and related records, and you actually can't use the second option here. They've graded out and it's going to run every time the flow is updated and meets these conditions. So those two fields change, this flow runs. It's only when an account record is updated. The rest of this canvas starts to look a lot like a process builder canvas, if you're familiar with that. We have a decision, and if that's true, we carry out some actions. Then we evaluate the next decision. If that's true, we carry out some actions, and so on and so forth. You can continue to flesh out your flow canvas to add more decisions and carry out more actions if that's true. This first one is checking to see if the customer priority got changed to high. So this was the same criteria I had from before. I've moved it into a decision. This is deciding, are the tasks needed? So customer priority equals high, and the record is updated to meet those conditions. If that's true, we're going to go down the left side of this path. And these three elements are exactly the same from before. Assigning values to the tasks, adding them to a collection, and then creating them in the database all in a single operation. Regardless if I go down the left side of this decision or I skip it entirely, I want to check the next decision here. And this is for our second requirement. This decision is checking, did the record's active field get updated to no? Because I have it checking that this record was updated to meet these conditions. If that's true, then I want to route to the left side of this decision. And for this, it looks pretty simple. This is an update records element. So I want to highlight how many things are actually happening here. When you set up an update records element and you use the specify conditions to identify records and set fields individually option, there's about 5 things happening. You're querying for records, you are looping through them, you are assigning new values down here, you're adding them to a collection, and you're committing it all to the database. 5 things that are happening that you don't have to deal with on your flow canvas. So anytime you can take advantage of this option, definitely use it. Just be aware that it is always running that query. So that's the one thing I'll show you in a subsequent example here, where you can avoid that query. So for this, for our scenario, we're going to be updating opportunity records. We use a query to find them. I'm searching for opportunities that are related to the same account. So the account ID equals the ID of the triggering record. That's from the $record global variable. I'm making sure those opportunities are open. So again, I have is closed equals false as criteria to find those open opportunities underneath that account. Then I can assign values to each of those records. You have to assign the same value to all records when you use this option. So you can use a formula here if you wanted to make this decision which value you assign to the stage. For our use case, we just need to mark them all as closed lost, so you can choose that static text. I want to show you what this would look like if things got more complicated. Let's say you wanted to make decisions based on fields on the record you're querying for. Let's say, like, for the opportunity, I needed to check something else on each opportunity before I assign a stage value. Here's how that flow would look. You would have to do those 5 operations I talked about yourself. So this would turn from 1 element to 5 elements. Here I have a get records. This is performing the query portion where I have the same criteria. Find me all the opportunities related to the same account that are open. Next step, I'm looping through them. So I have a loop on this canvas. This is something you do need to be careful with. Flows will only let you execute 2,000 elements. So if your account could have above 600 opportunity records, you're probably going to run into an issue here when you try to run this flow. So this is looping through all of the opportunities that were found in that query, and each one of these elements will count as it iterates through, which is why even though it's a 2,000 element limit for the overall flow, if you have a loop with 2 elements in it, you're really limited to about maybe even less than that. But yeah, like 600, depending on what else is happening, you might run into that governor limit there. For this assign values to each opportunity, this is where you can reference the field you want to update while you're looping through it. So this is saying each stage name on the records in that collection is going to get set equal to a stage value, and in here is where you can decide how you want to set that stage based on other fields on that same opportunity record, using set it to this stage or that other stage. I'm basing it off the probability here for whatever reason. Once you assign your values, you add the records to a collection. You have to do a separate collection when you are working with the results of a get records. So this is similar to the task thing from before, but we're adding each opportunity from the loop iteration. After we've assigned a new value to it, we add it to an opportunities to update collection. And after we exit the loop, we do our update opportunities as one fell swoop. And the difference here in this update records is we're not specifying conditions. We're using this second option where we have all the field values from a record or record collection. What I want to emphasize here is anytime you already have the IDs of the records you want to update, you want to use this second option here. That comes up a lot when, in this case, it comes up if you want to update a parent record, you actually don't need to query for it. What I've seen people do is they specify conditions to update a parent record, and they end up running a query that they don't need to run. So the way you can eliminate that query is assign the values to a record variable. You have access to all of it from the $record global variable to get that parent record ID. Assign that to the ID of a record variable. Assign any other values you need to assign within that assignment element, and then use this second option here to update records, specifying that record or record collection. One thing that I'm kind of think is weird that Salesforce offers is you can update the record that triggered the flow in your after save flow. That should be used almost never. Very, very sparingly would you ever want to do that. Anytime you are updating the record that triggered the flow, you should have that logic set up in your before save flow for that object. So be very careful to use this. This is one way that you're going to start having recursion happening in your org that might not need to happen, and this was the downfall of workflow rules. So take advantage of the before and after save context that flow offers and use them for the right situations. Okay, lot of different things to think about there. I do want to activate this version so I can give you a quick demo on how these pieces all work together. I'm going to come back over here, and let's say this Burlington Textiles is changed to inactive. I have a bunch of open opportunities here. As soon as I click save, notice I have the task still over here. Those different actions are evaluated independently, so I don't have another set of tasks created. I got to skip that piece. But because I updated active to no, all of my open opportunities got changed to close lost. And in some bizarre world where a customer priority gets changed to high and active gets changed to no at the same time, both of those actions would execute within that same flow. And that comes up a lot, and it's part of the reason I try to consolidate things is to make sure we are minimizing the amount of DML statements and having fewer elements of flow execute in order to keep the speed up as things start to scale. So I know I've thrown a lot at you. I want to do a quick wrap up on everything we've talked about here in the last hour. So here's a quick summary. This is a good slide to take a screenshot of. This is everything we talked about for flows optimized for fast field updates. So they run before save. You want to use entry conditions to narrow down when these flows run. You can use my trick of ID is null to indicate that it's a new record if you need entry conditions and you want it to run for new records. New in Summer 22, you can use formulas to set entry conditions, and that would give you the option to use the isNew function. Salesforce has said that there are performance implications for using formulas to set entry conditions. They hope to improve them in future releases, so I would be very careful to use them at this point. There are other tricks you can do. A question that always comes up is, how do I only run a flow for a certain record type? And I want to key it off of the developer name, not hard code an ID. I applaud you for that thinking. Yes, don't hard code an ID. The way I've solved for that is I set up a custom formula field on the object that simply references the developer name of the record type. And if you do that, you can reference that field within the standard entry condition checks without having to use this new formula option. So there are a couple of different ways to do that. If you use the formula option, sure, you can traverse and grab that record type developer name. There's a couple different ways to do that. I would be very careful to use formulas. I will keep you updated in future presentations if the guidance on that has changed. We want to protect our queries using decisions. What I mean by that is only run a query when you absolutely need to. Queries are one of those expensive things, so make sure you've minimized the amount of queries that you're running. My trick of storing piece of information in variables instead of record variables, that helps you so you don't have to add additional decisions and checks to make sure you found results. So you can definitely take advantage of that. And then at the end of your before save flow that's optimized for fast field updates, you want to use a single quote unquote update records or assignment element to assign values to the triggering record. You can use formula resources to set the values of each field individually, and that allows you to reuse your logic in multiple places. The last slide here, also good to take a screenshot of this one. This is everything we talked about for flows that are optimized for actions and related records. These are actions that happen after the record is saved and committed to the database. Again, we want to use entry conditions here. One thing I didn't touch on, but does come up as a question, how do I check for a brand new record in after save context? The same way I did that ID is null check for before save. What you can do in after save is check if the created date is changed. That will indicate that it's a new record. The reason you can't use the ID trick here is because after the record's saved and committed to the database, this flow logic runs and the record has an ID at that point, even for brand new records. So check the created date to see if it's changed. That'll indicate it's a brand new record. We want to protect each set of actions using a decision. So this is similar to the process builder canvas layout. We want to consolidate our database operations by using collections whenever possible so we can minimize the amount of DML happening. Only have that one create records using our laundry basket, a record collection variable to gather up all those tasks that we wanted to create. And then understanding the different options for the update records element. There are 5 things being executed if you use that third option to specify records individually by conditions and update those fields. So just be aware of that it's adding another query. It's okay if that's what you need to do. But if you already have all the IDs for the records you plan to update, use that second option where you can specify a record collection to update those values. Thank you so much for attending today. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at RealEvanPonter, or you can shoot me an email, evan@PonterSolutions. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And I will do the raffle at this point. Get that link. All right, who is our winner going to be? Let's start. And the winner is Gabriel. You just won a $25 gift card. So be on the lookout. The organizers will shoot you a message and you'll get an email in the next couple of days. Thank you everyone for attending. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat or the Q&A, and I will respond to you as soon as possible here. Thanks so much. All right, so the first question was, is an Apex framework in use here? I'm not using an Apex framework. I'm really just setting up a flow framework, but using a lot of programming concepts. So there's nothing you need to install. There's no other documentation on this aside from this presentation. I do have recordings of this if you'd like to see it again, but I'm just applying some programming concepts to the flow engine. Yes, I do have a video, so I can, they're recording this one, so you'll get a recording of this Pack Dreamin' session, so be on the lookout for that once they make those available. And the last question is, can we make assignment rules in Flow Builder? I tried making one, it wasn't giving full functionalities of assignment rule, is there any way? Um, you can like assign the owner of a record. You can do that in Flow and sort of use the decisions and operators to, grab the right user records that you want to do. It might be a little complicated compared to what assignment rules the native functionality might offer. It is certainly possible, but yeah, you're not going to have the full functionality of assignment rules. You're going to be limited to what the Flow engine provides in order for making those assignments. Typically, that would happen in a before save flow on the object where you want to update that owner, and you're just going to have to build in all the different logic for what you want to do there. So depending on what your logic is, that could get really complicated. I think that's all the questions, so thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your conference here.